Well, this is our next video as part of this interview series with Wise Women, Workwiser. And I am privileged to be here today with Tamra Hudgins. We're just so happy to have you.
Thank you.
And Tamra is the executive director of Girlstart, which is an amazing nonprofit that's near and dear to my heart. But for our audience, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about Girlstart.
Girlstart is science, technology, engineering, and math programs for girls. We provide year-round STEM education programs for 4th through 8th grade girls, primarily 4th and 5th grade girls. We are expanding our programs across Texas and reaching some girls with our national programs. We have been scaling up, and I expect that we will do more scaling up in the next couple of years. Right now we are completing the final year of a 3-year strategic plan, and we're rebuilding the next one. So at the same time, we have good feelings about how we've addressed and exceeded the goals of our strategic plan. We're also still in a little bit of kind of limbo because we're asking questions about what's next.
Mm-hmm. Which fits nicely with that forward-looking and the national reach that you're hoping to have and the growth you're experiencing.
That's true, yeah.
So let's start the conversation then. As executive director,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do for Girlstart?
I pretty much tell everybody I am the hey you, or I'm the complaint department on any given day. And that's putting it in a more, colloquial way. But when you're ED and you're ED of a small to mid-sized organization, our annual budget is around what they would call a mid-sized nonprofit organization. You still have a small enough staff. We have, I think as of July 1, we'll have 14, maybe 15 people full-time, 175 to 200 part-time people. And that sounds big, but really on any given day, we're about 15 people. Mm-hmm. When you are a group of 15 people and you're focused on a particular mission, and that mission is very, very deliberate and purposeful, there's not a lot of depth to the team that you have. And we are very tactical in what it is that we do on a daily basis. So as executive director, I have to bring a lot of acumen and skills to the table, which includes figuring out how to troubleshoot the network, figuring out how to make sure that all of the IT works, figuring out drainage in the backyard because we used to flood. It's those types of life skills that come with being an ED that is pretty vital. As far as I know, there are people who assume executive director jobs, and there are people who are simply not able to do anything else. I am one of those people who's not able to do anything else. Being ED means that I am in charge of fundraising, I'm in charge of staff, I'm in charge of the operations side of the house, I'm in charge of making sure that our organization operates in a transparent and kind of best practices way. And that means that I have to know how other nonprofit organizations should work and how they do work in the real world, mm-hmm. and also where nonprofit organizations screw up so that we don't do that. But on any given day, I report to a board, I manage staff. Our annual budget is about $3 million now. We own a building. So it's soup to nuts. I wish it were primarily fundraising, and it pretty much is, but it is soup to nuts as well.
You're in charge of all those other aspects too, and they're vital to the organization.
Yeah.
And doing well, of course.
Yeah, it's like when the building smells, you got to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. Flooding would be an issue. Yes, we need to take care of that.
Yeah.
So you were talking earlier, you have this PhD in art history. You've spent time abroad, and when I first had the opportunity even to ask if you'd be willing to do this interview, I had an inkling that you would have a very interesting past, and so I thought if we could spend some time just on, you have this amazing position working for an amazing nonprofit organization, but what is the backstory? How did you get into the position of one day being executive director for a place like Girlstart?
Well, I got to college early. I graduated high school at 16. I thought that I was called upon to be creative and be in the arts because I didn't know of any other female role models. My dad is an engineer and an intellectual property attorney, and my mom is kind of in the journalism and communications and so forth. But I primarily grew up in her office and meeting her people instead of kind of the engineering side. And so really the arts were the thing that was kind of accessible to me at that point. Did undergraduate school, completely stank at making art. I'm not creative. I'm a creative thinker, but I'm not creative. I can't make art. Ended up in art history for undergrad, and it really spoke to me. It felt like it was a place where I could be effective and functional. I have a focus on detail. I'm interested in narratives and in histories and in complex situations. So I ended up in Eastern European art history and Central European art history of the 19th and 20th century. And so I went and did the master's degree in Chicago. I ended up getting shuttled around from different departments because at that point the wall had only just fallen down. So nobody really understood what art in Central and Eastern Europe was like, which was fascinating because all of this political turmoil was happening and all of this very meaningful civic discourse was happening in Central and Eastern Europe. And so it was a very exciting time to kind of be around that subject. But I didn't have a particularly satisfying time at the master's level, and all of my colleagues and peers were writing the next thesis on Picasso, and I certainly didn't want to do anything like that. And so I picked something that was a little bit non-traditional, and in order to finish the thesis, I went to the Czech Republic, and that time the internet really didn't exist, so I went to the library and read newspapers and looked at, ads for English teachers, and I went to Prague in late 1991 to go and teach English in a town called Pilzeň. It was about 175,000 people and very few English speakers. And I was told, okay, get here. You'll have a job when you get here. Wait at the airport and some guy in a white car will pick you up. And it took about 4 hours and my luggage was lost. And he picked me up in Prague and we went a couple hours down the road to this smaller town, and it really taught me how to be flexible. It taught me how to cope on my own. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the language. I didn't know what I was doing. There were maybe 10 English speakers in the whole town, and I had to learn how to cope. And I had to learn with accepting no on a daily basis. And so that really helped me focus my energies. And even if I was not certain about art history, as I want to be a professor forever and I want to lecture to college students, by the time I got through I decided to do the dissertation at Charles University in Prague. It was a fantastic experience, even though there was a lot of doubt about whether or not the value of a PhD from a European institution would somehow have the same cachet as the PhD from an American university. And I got a fantastic education. I worked with people who, they would go hang out with the president. And so I got to meet a lot of people who were really active in government, who were former academics. And when I was finishing the dissertation, I knew I needed to finish it. My grandmother wanted me to do it. It would made her proud kind of thing. But by the time I finished, I was not particularly enamored of spending all of my time doing art history because I saw all these people around me who were extremely smart people, who some of them became very active in rebuilding civic society, which was really fascinating. And other friends of mine who were involved in Yugoslavia and the Yugoslav conflict at that time was also very fascinating. And seeing these smart people rebuild a society was very energizing to me. I had the opportunity of working at the Central European University, which is part of the Soros Civic Society initiative that he has. And that really became much more interesting to me. So when I came back from the Czech Republic, after my dissertation, I had a problem with living status. I was an immigrant, right? Or I was a foreigner, more importantly. And so when I came back to the States, I really dedicated my energies towards nonprofit organizations in particular, because those people in Prague and in Central Europe generally showed me that if you're a smart person, you have the opportunity to actually shape the public discourse and civic life. And that for me was much more motivating than discussing minutiae in paintings.
Although
Frankly,
that works well for cocktail hours and other
trivia, basically. And understanding history. I do think that is something that many American students do not understand. And I think that is a challenge for our contemporary life and our current politics. But I would say that is it essential to kind of like my background? It kind of is, but it's more that it shaped it rather than defined what the playing field would look like. Mm-hmm. And so it was really a kind of a new experience to go, okay, now I thought I was going to do this, and now I'm really taking it over here. but I felt much more comfortable in the nonprofit space. So I've been in nonprofits for about 25 years now.
And I mean, even just that story, I love how it is, and we hear this a lot, that, you know, the people that we interview, oftentimes they're going in this direction maybe to check this box, so they expected to have a certain kind of experience.
Right.
And they come out of that experience not only with a different experience, but one that's influenced and shaped their future professions and how maybe they think about the world.
Right. And and if you take the opportunity to immerse yourself in whatever this new experience is, rather than having your assumptions kind of define what that experience is, you're going to get a lot more out of it, and you'll be a stronger person because of it. If I had held on to my assumptions about, okay, my life is going to be this, this, and this is just a way through, rather than as a moment or a series of moments, I probably would have just come out of it and gone to university and taught graduate students and check the box.
Yeah, exactly. So you have this amazing experience. You come back to the States and you know now you want to devote this next phase of the career, whatever that is, to nonprofit. So where did you start?
I went back to Chicago. I got involved in some museum work because that was an obvious thing. If you have a PhD in art history, museums are going to look at you. Ended up working in some education programs, and then I ran my own. Well, I didn't found it, but I was the second ED. So I did an organizational turnaround, and that was my first taste of what it's like to be an ED and the grit and resilience and persistence that it requires in being an ED, as well as the scope of skills that you have to bring to that particular table. Being a curator doesn't necessarily mean that you can deal with a complex web of really practical details. It might, but it might not. So I don't believe that I was trained in that particular, again, that very limited vein. By having the kind of creative and historical stuff kind of be the trajectory of my studies, but really not the sum total of my experience, I was able to say, okay, sure, I've got this credential, but here's all these other things that I know how to do. And that became more interesting for other people as time went by, and as I was able to demonstrate value by raising money and stabilizing organizations. This is my fourth organizational turnaround, at least. So I became kind of known as that kind of person who would take on a challenge of, okay, here's an organization, they're at a particular juncture, their situation may or may not be favorable, go fix it. And that is also something that I think is unique to my experience. I don't know too many people who would be frankly stupid enough to do that on a regular basis.
Well, so let's take that a little deeper. You know, what drives you in that? Why do you enjoy that challenge? A lot of people, I think, when we say that nonprofits are just a company in general, when they're not doing so well, you're right. There's not many people that would come in and say, "Oh, yeah, please allow me to try to turn this ship around."
It's. I hesitate to say that it's a calling, but it's a calling. I am a kind of, when I did one of the leadership programs here, they make you give yourself a nickname, right? You have to identify what your nickname is and why you have it. And I had never done one of these programs before, and so I decided that my name was going to be Underdog because I'm a stalwart defender of the underdog. And that for me is a really motivating thing. When I moved to Texas, I was running the community foundation in a community north of here, and was able to do some fundamental change to help that situation. And being focused on doing what you can to add value and to apply really simple development principles of if you put two things together that otherwise might not meet and you can make something better and bigger out of all of them, that for me is the reason why I'm in it. If I'm able to put things together that normally wouldn't mix, but those two things together or multiple things together can create something much bigger than all of those combined, that's what I'm in it for. And that's what's motivating for me.
So I hear you. I just, the confidence that you have in owning your story, and it's obvious the time that you've spent what I would call self-reflection, but that you even know that the underdog, like that's your nickname. Do you think that was kind of from the beginning you have had that alignment and that passion and that you were aware of it, or is it something that developed over? Okay.
Yes. I mean, I can say my daughter has just completed the 7th grade, and I realize how incredibly uncool it is to say this, but I did win Miss Integrity in 7th grade. And so that has been my North Star in that way. I've always been called upon to serve. I used to hear my grandmother ran a nursing school that was associated with hospital in Jacksonville, Illinois, and she passed a couple years ago now. And she was a pioneer. I mean, she was running and essentially being CEO, executive director of a nursing school, and it didn't exist, and then she made it go, and then she got funding for it, and there are nursing students even in Austin that will write me and tell me how influential she was for them on their lives. And I do believe that that type of thing does tend to skip a generation unless you kind of focus on it. But my grandmother would tell me stories about the health situation of women and kind of the life situation for women generally, which was fascinating to me because I grew up in the 70s. I was told that I could do anything. I can be anything. You know, the world's your oyster. You can have everything you want. And being so near to my grandmother kind of emotionally and mentally, it shocked me that her experience was so fundamentally different. And I don't believe that I ever took the notion of equality or opportunity or possibility. I don't think I took it for granted. And I know that when I left for the Czech Republic in 1991, everybody around me would say, you're going to a third world country. You need to bring this, and you need to bring, because they don't possibly have that. Because, you know, the subtext is they're essentially heathens, right? And every child that I ever met, friends of mine who had children, they would have violin, art, theater, everything that American children don't have now. They were far more civilized than most people that I ever met. And in fact, you know, they taught me, it's like you turn up at a house, you take wine, you take flowers, that's what you do. So I think it's my grandmother's framework that really helped me see very seriously and very empathetically that people have challenges. And just because they have challenges doesn't mean they're somehow beneath you. It's a calling of yours to help. It's a calling of yours, and it's your responsibility to do something. It's in the wiring. It is in the wiring.
So for people that don't feel like they have that clarity of that calling, what advice do you have? Because I feel like the people that I work with and just, you know, people in my community or friends that I talk to, I think they would give anything to have that sense of clarity and those meaningful relationships like you had with your grandmother that influenced and shaped your perspective of life. For those that don't and they're struggling to find how they can align that meaning with what they choose for their profession, do you have any advice for individuals that might be struggling with that?
Well, I do. And firstly, I'd say something to the effect of just because you don't have that doesn't mean I don't envy the kind of life stability that they have. So just because they seem to not have something doesn't mean that I have all of these things. I do not. My life is much less stable because I have been called to be a nonprofiteer. And that is something that I work through every day. But what I can say is that when I worked at the Community Foundation, I was a nonprofiteer and wasn't a nonprofiteer. My job was to help donors, people, identify things that they were passionate about. Extremely successful people who wanted to do something, and they'd come into my room and they'd say, I want to do something, but I don't know what I want to do. And I'd ask, so what do you get excited about? What are you thinking? Tell me about things that you like, that you spend your time doing, that motivates you. And they'd start talking about something. And, you know, I can't tell you the number of times of people that came into the room thinking that they knew what that one thing was going to be, and they'd come out with something completely different. And it really has to do with identifying those things that are deeply personal to you. And I don't know if it's that people are uncomfortable asking those questions, and maybe it's the case that, I mean, in a case like mine, you know, I have been in a foreign country not knowing where I'm necessarily going to sleep the next day, and that really helps you focus on what's important and the things that matter to you. So I would say think about the things that if you had a day off, what would you do? You know, if you are thinking, there was a great training that I experienced one time, and it was for people who were working with very troubled or potentially troubled children, and particularly children who are adolescents and therefore vulnerable. And they asked all of us, and this is not something I like to do. I'm from the Midwest. We don't do this, And I was an ED rather than a program person. And they just said, close your eyes. And then they walked through the exercise and they said, I want you to think about a time where you felt completely safe. And then they walked through another kind of series of questions that added layers of not just safety, but also warmth and comfort, and what that looks like and what that felt like, and can they remember when that was, and can they identify that feeling with something that they recognize in the world. And maybe it's a humane society, maybe it's an art museum, maybe it's an education program, maybe it's something else, maybe it's the library. One thing that I do worry about when people ask me about this type of thing is that I think that people are too willing to get into what I would call dangerous situations too quickly. Get your toe wet a little bit. Don't go directly to those organizations that might scare you. For me, for example, and this is true when I ran arts organizations in Chicago and in running Girlstart here, my colleagues would never, ever have me be in front of a group of 20 children. That's just not what I do. I'm not an educator. And in fact, 20 girls, the notion of me having to be an educator of 20 girls scares the daylights out of me. But that doesn't mean that I don't have value to that particular mission. And everybody has to find kind of where their comfort level is and where they think that they can add value. I do think that it's vital that people step out of their day-to-day, I'm a this kind of person, or I'm a that kind of person to add value. Yes, CPAs are valued. Absolutely. Yes, attorneys are valued. But that type of thinking can help an organization much more than I've got my CPA hat sitting at this table. I'd much rather have someone help me with a logical analysis or help with strategic planning that is therefore logical and planful, and use those same skills to advance a mission.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So, when I think ahead, I guess I'll pose it from two different perspectives. What do you see for the future for Girlstart?
I think we're going national. I think it's not a question of if, I think it's a question of when. I think the big further question is how is that going to be sustainable? So while I say we're going to go national, I'm not excited about that. I mean, I'm excited about it, but I'm also scared to death about it because I know what it's going to take, and I don't know if we have what it takes. I mean, to raise the money, frankly. We have absolutely the capacity to do the programs, to reach more girls, to hire college students, to, get office leases and all of that. But this requires a significant amount of philanthropy, and just knowing what I know about this work, I don't believe that there's an unlimited amount of that in the world. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of organizations in the world that are doing good work. And when we go to a new community, one of the questions that we ask is, are we going to be disrupting the extant philanthropy in that community such that it adversely impacts somebody else? Because that's not the way that we want to grow. We want to make sure that we are adding value. So that's what I think is in the future for Girlstart. I mean, I think that we are going to be in Boston full year. I think that we're going to be in the Bay Area full year with Girlstart After School and Girlstart Summer Camp. I think that if we're lucky, we will sustain our work in Houston and in North Texas. Mm-hmm. After that, I don't know. But hopefully the Bay Area and Boston will keep us busy for the next 3 to 5 years of our strategic plan, such that then the collective will of our board and staff can come together and articulate what they think is the vision for those next years. I am resistant because I am an ED that has, again, I followed founders several times. It's not about what I think exclusively. I mean, obviously I have some influence in the how and the what and some of the things. And maybe I come up with an idea here or there. But I try not to be the person going, we're doing this because I said so on this particular time frame, and all you people have to line up because I'm the boss. That's just not the way I work. And I don't think that that's a recipe for sustainability either. So I really would be resistant to say too much more than that, because I would really want to get everybody's input.
To see what that looked like.
Yep.
Well, I think it's a beautiful follow-on question too then. Taking that answer, what do you see as the executive director role in the future for Girlstart? How do you see that changing and growing?
It's going to change because it's going to be managing teams of teams. And that's something that I'm trying to learn about a little bit. You know, by having regional offices in Houston, by having regional offices in North Texas, you know, rather than just being the day-to-day on simply or only a Central Texas focused program with maybe some satellite programs, we all have to rise up and learn how to do our work, but in an exponential way. And so that requires us to let go of some things and to add on newer things. And to rinse, lather, and repeat, frankly. Hopefully, again, or assuming that the model, as we've seen it, is replicable. And we have seen that it is possible. It is promising. It is working in Houston. We believe it's working in North Texas, and we believe it can work in national locations as well. Whether the support is there for that is still an open question.
So what do you hope to continue to develop on a personal level as you see Girlstart, not only Girlstart growing, but the ED role continue to expand? You know, what do you see? We were talking earlier about the reading up on the teams of teams.
Yeah.
Where are you going to focus on building up that skill set in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I mean, I did try to do the MBA, and it was simply too expensive before I moved to Texas. You know, I've always been passionate about international business, and that's where I would ultimately like to go. You know, my dream job when I was a kid would have been Secretary General of the UN, and that's just not going to happen. But if I think, not likely. But the thing that I think I'm beginning to get excited about is if it's the case that some of our corporate partners can see our value with regard to how Girlstart's culture is an effective place to work, if how the way that we define and kind of establish roles and rollouts of strategic plan is an effective thing to be inspired by in the corporate world, I think that what we are doing and what I am doing could be helpful for corporate boards, for example. So I'd like to sit on a corporate board. I think that when you are talking about an organization that is like Girlstart, it may seem dissimilar, but at the same time, nonprofits run on 0 ROI. And so within that context, you have to be much leaner and much more nimble than even the fastest of startup organizations.
Sure.
And I think that we would have a lot of value to add in that way. That is something that I would like to add to my plate. I would like also for us to grow a national board, and that sounds like it's not about me, but it is kind of about me, because I would like for Girlstart to be able to peg itself to a national conversation about STEM. I think we're ready. We are a national leader. We are perceived as a national leader. We are not on the coasts full-time yet, and that is culturally or perceptually a challenge when it comes to, say, national media attention and the like. I would like to take that moment to pull ourselves to that national level in more ways than we are, than just the research and the outcomes and so forth, such that Girlstart can be part of that national conversation.
Mm-hmm. So looking back at, last question for this segment, when you're looking back on your career, kind of your path, and the way that it's taken you, what advice do you think you have for other professionals, men or women, trying to navigate their own professions, really trying to align what they're passionate about?
I'll say that I don't believe that I necessarily have good news or anything that is useful other than be true to yourself. If you find yourself in a situation that is really not working, get yourself out. I had the unfortunate situation, for example, of working for somebody who was extremely unethical and was doing a great deal of damage. And it was soul-sucking to have to work for this person on a daily basis, and I had to get out. And it's really important to make sure that your fit is where you are. If you feel like you're not fitting in the space where you need to be, then you need to find a better space. There are so many corporate cultures that are out there. People can really only be effective when they are in an environment that respects their values and appreciates their values and appreciates them as the people that they are. And if you are the type of person that is great in, a cookie cutter type environment or a this type of environment or that, great. Identify that in yourself and go gravitate towards those environments. If you're if you're a person who needs something quote unquote more, then go towards those other things. Culture really, really matters. I mean, you can apply to jobs all over the place, but you're not going to fit everywhere.
I love it. Thank you, Tamra.
Hopefully it's helpful.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.